Welcome to Standing on Business with Eric Foss. I'm your host, Eric Foss. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Standing on Business with Eric Foss. I'm your host, Eric Foss. Today, guys, I got a good one for you. It's going to quell up some rumors that have been going around the community and stuff. I want to use these two cases of Sonny Franzese and Gotti to explain the differences between supervised release and the old law of parole, and just the difference between the old law and the new law, and how much time people do in prison sentences and how this all works. Now, I know there's been a lot of stuff going around about Gotti and stuff like that, being involved still in crime or whatever. I want to say this firsthand right now. I do not believe Gotti is involved in any type of crime. I believe he did his prison sentence and he should be left alone. He's not involved in no type of crime, if you ask me. I do not believe he is. This has nothing to do with that. We're just going to dive into a few of these things. Let's start now with Sonny Franzese. Now, all through the community, what do we hear? Sonny Franzese did 50 years. He was the oldest inmate, federal inmate. Yes, he was the oldest federal inmate. That is true. But that was not on that original 50-year sentence. That was a whole different case. Sonny Franzese did around, at the most, we're going to say 12 years straight on that 50-year sentence. And I'll break that down for you right now. And then we'll break down Gotti, and I will show you the difference, and I'll show you how this all rolls over. Okay, guys, let's get started. Let's get started with Sonny. Now, I don't need the computer for this, but, I do want to do this on the computer. All you have to do is type in, when did Sonny Franzese go to prison for 50 years? Okay, here's what we get. Sonny Franzese was sentenced to 50 years in prison in 1967 for his role in orchestrating bank robberies across the United States. He was the underboss of the Colombo crime family at the time. Okay, in 1967, he was sentenced. So, I don't know if he was out on bail or not like that, but let's assume he wasn't. So, apparently he went to trial, so you figure another year and a half, maybe a couple years. That's why I'm going to give him 12 years and some change, possibly. Because right here it says, Franzese was paroled in 1978. Now, pay attention to these dates. And he was re-imprisoned multiple times for parole violations. Now, 1967 to 1978, that's 11 years. And like I said, count like a year and some change or whatever for waiting to go to trial and stuff. So that's about a quarter of his 50-year sentence. And he made parole. That was the old law, and we'll get into why they changed that. And this is one of the reasons why they changed that. And they have supervised release now, and they did away with parole. So, as it says, he was paroled in 78, and he was re-imprisoned for parole violations. That's because back then, when you got out of federal prison, you had a parole officer, and, you're under the same type of stuff. Like people who've been with the state and all, it's the same, basically same type of thing as that. You could violate and they revoke your parole and you go back for a certain amount of time. They might release you, put you back on it, whatever. Basically parole. They do not have that anymore. They don't have the division. They don't have the officers, anything. We're going to get into that in a minute. And that's why Gotti is not on parole. Okay. He was again named underboss of the Colombo family in 2005. In 2011, at the age of 94, he was sentenced to 8 years in prison for extorting protection payments from a pizzeria and 2 Manhattan strip clubs. Okay, so that shows you. In 2011, he was caught a new case. And yes, at the end of his life, he went back to prison, not for a parole violation, but because he violated supervised release. I know a little bit about supervised release because I've completed it twice. Okay. Now, Gotti's situation. Gotti did 29 years flat on his 50-year sentence. He was eligible for parole in 1999. He was shot down. Okay, so you fast forward now 20 years later. He basically maxed his sentence out. Now, what is the situation with that is for Gene to be on supervised release, just like this. I will pull myself up. Eric Foss, Baltimore. You could Google. You scroll down a little bit. United States Attorney's Office 2005 press release. March 11, 2005. Baltimore drug smuggler sentenced, whatever. Okay. The case was jointly investigated. Let me get down to this. Now, as you see in here, if you go look me up, it says Eric Foss, age 28, which I was at the time, of Baltimore, Maryland. I was sentenced to 145 months in prison, followed by 4 years of supervised release. Now, that was my first federal case. You can go to my second federal case also and pull it up. I was sentenced to 42 months in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release, which I just completed last month. So I know a little bit about this, okay? To be on supervised release, you have to be sentenced to supervised release. It's kind of like a double sentence. My guys who've been with the feds ever since the new law came about, they know what I'm talking about because it's kind of like they give us two sentences. You got 145 months in prison and then another 4 years of supervised release afterwards. Now, they could not put Gene Gotti on supervised release because Gene Gotti did not. There was no such thing as supervised release when he was sentenced. Now, just like there's no such thing as parole anymore after 1987. You can look that up. Now, let's do this. Gene Gotti versus the United States of America. We're not going to get on to his case, but you could go down and pull his case out. And if you go into the background, John Caniglia, Gene Gotti, blah, blah, blah. They were sentenced to, well, Gene Gotti was sentenced to 50 years and a $75,000 fine. He was not sentenced to supervised release because it did not exist. So now what about parole? Let's do this. Is Gene Gotti on parole? Let's see this. You type that in. No, Gene Gotti is not currently on parole. He was released from prison in September 2018 after serving his sentence as no longer under parole supervision. So it breaks down his sentence length. He did 29 years on it. So basically, when you do the math on this, Gene did his sentence. He did his flat time. He did his 29 years. Now, the reason they changed these laws is because let's go back to Sonny. Let's go back to any kingpin, anything like that. And once again, like I told you, convicts and inmates mess everything up. What happened was there was some guy, he was either like a crime boss in a mob or he was in some, biker leader or whatever, some big time dude or whatever. Now, the prosecutors were beating their chest because they gave him a 25-year sentence. So what did he do? He sent pictures to the prosecutor of him laying down in the yard, tanning and stuff, just relaxing in the federal prison. And now he had 25 years. He knows he's going to be home in 10 years. You know what I mean? So this guy's just chilling back. So he's making an ass out of the prosecutor. A lot of people were doing that. No, the feds rethought that and they said, hold up. You have kingpins and stuff that we're putting away. If you get 30 years, you'll be out in 10 and you're just sitting in there relaxing. We used to call that Peter Beach. Them jerk-offs that lay out 10. I would never do that. Trust me, you will never see me doing that. But people do that. And the federal prisons back then were a lot more better. But anyway, so what the feds did, they said, look, this is not working. Because what's the deterrent? I could be a kingpin drug dealer, a kingpin, look, he was the underboss. He got 50 years. He's out in 12 years. So what's the worst that can happen to you? People weren't cooperating because now think of the underlings. Okay, what was a 10-year sentence then? Let's just say you went to trial and got 10 years. By the time you got to 10 years, you basically already have almost time served because you're going to go for parole in a quarter of your time. And if you make it, you will be out in 2.5 years on the 10 or something like that. Not even. But it would, a quarter of your time would say, yeah, about 2.5 years, yes. on 10 years. So that is why they changed it. So now, where does Gene Gotti fall in? He's sitting in prison. He's under the old law. He's under parole, stuff like that. But he was denied parole. But now, basically, what he did by doing 29 years straight, he killed his 50-year sentence. There's no longer a 50-year sentence. There's no way to put supervision on him when you release him, because how do you do it? How do you determine the guidelines and what type of violation there is? They don't have these offices. The offices are now set up for supervised release. I know this. I violated a year and a half ago. I've told this story. When that person stole my money, I got it back. Remember, I said I got locked up. I had to sit there for 4 months because I had a detainer for violation of supervised release. Now, obviously, I beat the case and the violation was dismissed. But I still got the paperwork given to me when I went to court, because I had to go to federal court and be released after I beat the state case. They came and picked me up from Baltimore County Jail and took me down to Chesapeake Detention Center overnight, and I went and seen the federal judge the next day. They dismissed the violation. But there is guidelines. When we violate on supervised release, they have A, B, and C violations. That violation that I just had, it carried a guideline of 8 months to 24 months, something like that. Or it might have been 13 months to 24 months, something like that. So had I had been found guilty in that case or whatever, or they decided to violate me in whatever class that was, that would be the guideline that I'm facing. Now, the problem is you can't do that with Gene Gotti. He's not on supervised release. And there's no more federal parole. So once they actually get to a point, they basically kill their whole sentence. When Gene was released, he was probably released to a halfway house, and then because he's still part of the BOP, or he might not even got a halfway house. But whenever his prison time is over with on that 29 years, he is not on no type of parole. Now, people will say, well, you know, what am I saying this for and what reasons and all? Because people are out here saying, like, you know, who is he hanging with and all that kind of stuff. Here's the thing. Even if you're not on parole, you still do not want to, Gene would not want to go hanging around none of these guys. Nobody who's ever been involved in organized crime, nobody he don't know what they're doing. And I'll tell you why. He doesn't want to be me. Because this has happened to me. Do you want me to bring my co-defendant on alive? He will explain it to you. My last case, it was being investigated for like a year. The case ended in November of 2018. I entered the case at the end of October of 2018 by one conversation. I walked into a conspiracy. I was actually innocent of what I just went to prison for 3.5 years. But I walked into a conspiracy. Gene Gotti does not want to fall victim to something like that. So obviously that's why he don't talk to people. That's why he don't go around people, things like that. It has nothing to do with supervised release, because he's not on that. It did not exist. Or parole. He maxed out his sentence, basically. Sonny Franzese did not max out his sentence. And if we do the math, let's just say he had a year and some change in before he got sentenced in 67 and paroled in 78. You figure 12 years and a few months would be a quarter of a 50-year sentence. So yes, Sonny Franzese was sentenced to 50 years originally. He did not do any stretch. He's never done 15 years straight. He's done about, like I said, at the most 12 years and some change straight. And he got out, and he was able to violate because they still had parole all the way up until 87. And even past that, they still had them offices and all running. This stuff costs money, guys. And the people who are going to say, well, why wouldn't they just use the supervised release officers as parole? I don't know. The same reason why if they're taking you from Pennsylvania to Kentucky, they fly you to Oklahoma City, Atlanta, Chicago, Florida, maybe California, then finally get you to here, then put you in Atlanta, then they drive you to Kentucky. Same reason. Doesn't make sense. But also, I don't know if they have the funding. How can you fund something that don't exist? There's no such thing as parole. Now, we'll go to that. Can you be on federal parole? It's very easy. I don't need to give. I'm just showing you now. Okay, let's see this. I asked this, can you be on federal parole on Google? No. Generally, you cannot be on federal parole if you were sentenced for a federal crime after November 1st, 1987. So in other words, committed the crime and sentenced to it and everything like that after 1987, which Gene Gotti and them, their crime was in like 1983. As the Sentencing Reform Act of 1984 eliminated parole for most federal offenses committed after that date. However, the United States Parole Commission still handles cases for offenders sentenced before that date who were eligible for parole under older laws. My point. Gene's situation, he didn't make parole. He did not make parole. So for the people who actually make parole, they may have them, because I do remember what they did. Gene maxed out his sentence. That's what he did. He was under the old law. They weren't getting 50, 40 days a year back then. They were accumulating a ton of good time. It's basically like mandatorying out a state sentence. My guys from Maryland, you understand what I'm saying? He basically mandatoried out. If you've ever been in state prison, guys know the difference between making parole and mandatorying out. Gene mandatoried out. So he was not on no supervision. And this is it. The U.S. Parole Commission still will oversee parole hearings. Parole hearings. They don't have parole officers. The United States Parole Commission still oversees parole hearings for prisoners sentenced before November 1st, 1987. So in other words, they had his hearing in 99 and denied him. They may have had another hearing in 18 and said, yeah, he mandatoried out, release him. But the point is, it's not on parole, not on supervised release, because they didn't have supervised release. Now, supervised release, instead of parole, most offenders now serve a period of supervised release after serving their prison sentences. And that is a fact. I've done it twice and I've completed it. Now, the reason why I'm getting on these subjects, guys, is because, like I said, I can talk about the streets and stuff like that, but I can't give you direct stuff about what these guys say and debunk certain things. We can just go logically. But when they start talking, because a lot of these mob guys and this mob stuff is a lot of prison content and a lot of, law. Nobody knows this stuff better than me. I've been on the supervised release twice. I know people under the old laws, everything like that. So no, I'm just going to bring the facts. So you can get your facts from whoever you want. But like I said, I will walk you through it. Any questions, put it in the comments. I will do lives, anything like that if you want to know. When it comes to this, and especially this, guys, remember, these guys are all on drug cases. Who do you think knows the drug laws better than your boy? Nobody. Nobody. Anyway, guys, until next time. Oh, I'm coming out with some fire this week, too. I'm going to point out something that everybody missed. Gravana, you're on deck. But I'm not saying which one. All right, guys, till next time, just remember, always stand on business.